Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 11. There were supposed to be 12 of you, Abigail said pointedly, narrowing her eyes at the group of spree agents who were huddled behind Nicta, all staring at the 3 cadet witches with varying levels of trust. Come on, little bells, Nicta shook her head. Not everyone who originally wanted in on this mission were too keen on working together with the army. If you remember correctly, Nicta said testily, your mother originally promised me a strike team, and instead I get you 3. We have the witch bomb, Abigail countered, not backing up. Abs, Rael said nervously. Can we not? Abigail clenched her jaw, but she did as Rael asked, and backed off from glaring at Nicta. So, what's the plan? Tally asked nervously, rubbing her hands together in an attempt to keep them warm. Virginia in November was cold, much colder than anything she had gotten used to growing up in NorCal. She was doing her best not to shiver in front of everyone. There were only 6 spree agents that still showed up with Nicta, and Tally was suddenly thankful that Petra had put Nicta in charge. None of the women standing behind her looked like they would even remotely listen to anything any of the girls had to say. All right, everybody, listen up, Nicta said loudly, gaining everyone's attention. 2 clicks down the road is the Camarilla base. There are several different ways into this building, and we are going to take advantage of them all. You 3, she pointed at several of her agents, you guys are going to go in from the basement and work your way up, killing everyone you see. You 3, she pointed to the other 3 agents, there's a roof access where you will enter, and you will do the same, working your way down. If there are any hostages, free them, but only after the building is secure. Do you understand? The group of agents nodded, all murmuring in agreement. Good. Nicta turned back to the trio of cadets. You 3 are going to come with me. We have a special job to do. We do? I didn't hear about this, Abigail said. Nicta just smirked. Red, little bells, it is our job to escort Witch Bomb over here to the heart of the base, where they have been producing the witch plague. Once we get there, she'll use her magic mushroom powers to destroy everything. It's not magic Never mind, Rael grumbled. Nicta just eyed Rael. We all good here? She glanced around the group as they all nodded slowly. Good, because Petra will kill me if anything happens to you guys, and I would much prefer to stay on her good side. She turned on her heel, snapping her fingers to get everyone's attention. Let's go. Nicta was scarily good at her job, Tally decided. Even her agents, all but disappearing into the inky blackness of the night as they drew closer to the base, seemed to have a laser focus on their mission. It was almost military in a way, the coordination and precision with which they went about their mission, although Tally would never dare to speak that aloud to Nicta. She didn't want to risk her head getting whipped off. They waited outside the Camarilla base, huddled into a dark corner behind some bushes, listening for the signal from Nicta's agents to let them know it was safe to enter. Telly tried and failed to suppress another shiver, feeling Rael press up against her in response, rubbing her hands up and down Telly's arms. An owl hoot broke the silence of the night, and Nicta turned to face them at the noise, holding a finger up to her lips. The girls nodded, and they all crept forward, following the spree founder's lead. Even though it was Nicta, and even though Telly wasn't 100% certain they could completely trust her, Telly was still grateful that she was the one in charge. She may not have been an official member of the army anymore, but she still exuded an aura of command, one that even Abigail and Rael found themselves deferring to. Gone was the cocky and terrible flirt that had taunted Telly in the woods all those months ago, and in its place was someone she didn't quite recognize, but was still grateful for nonetheless. Nicta slipped a knife from her boot as they approached the window, and she slid the blade between the window and the sill, dragging it quietly, bringing up some of the paint as she did so. She pushed down on the hilt, the blade bending a little under the pressure, but then the bottom of the window creaked slightly and gave away, sliding open quietly. She slipped the knife back into her boot, and in one swift motion vaulted herself through the window. Telly followed her, much less graceful, her sisters stumbling in after as Nicta rolled her eyes at them, but didn't say anything. Once they all straightened and composed themselves, she motioned for them to follow with a flick of her wrist. Telly's hand was wrapped tightly around her scourge, her free hand clenching at her side. Even though she knew she needed to keep her mind on the mission, her thoughts kept drifting to Sarah. What was she doing right now? What was she thinking now that Telly hadn't been able to show up? Somehow the thought of Sarah being mad at her over it was easier to handle than the thought of Sarah being heartbroken because of her. Nicta's arm flew out, catching Telly in the chest as she stopped before she rounded the corner, peering around it. She glanced behind her at the girls. "Do any of you guys know sleep induction?" She was met with 3 blank stares, and she fought back a groan. "Thanks a lot for the stellar help, Petra," she muttered to herself, before fixing Telly with a stare. "I'm not sure what's going on with you right now, but you need to get your shit together. You should have been able to spot those 2 guards at the end of the hallway, but we almost walked right into them." Telly's face flushed, like she was being scolded by a superior officer. "Sorry, I'll pay more attention." "Good." Nicta turned back around to peer around the corner again. "Stay here," she whispered, as she took off, quietly running down the hallway, her footsteps virtually silent. The 3 girls all shuffled forward, peering around the corner, as Nicta slunk forward. She opened her mouth, an unheard seed spilling out of it as the guard closest to her collapsed like a rag doll, and she swiped his scythe before he even hit the ground. The second guard turned around at the noise of the body hitting the floor, but he didn't even get a chance to react before Nicta stabbed him in the chest with his partner's scythe. He dropped to the floor with a strangled gurgle. "Damn," Telly heard Abigail whisper behind her. "Not gonna lie, that was pretty cool." Nicta removed the scythe from the guard's chest with a sickening noise that made Telly's skin crawl, even at a distance. She straightened up, wiping the blood from the blade onto her dark pants. She crooked a finger at the girls, a silent command to follow her. "Can I just say that I'm really glad she's on our side this time?" Abigail spoke again as they all took off after her. They slowly made their way through the winding hallways and corridors of the building. It was almost too easy. Every once in a while, Telly would send some guards up ahead, and before anyone could even react, Nicta would be stepping forward, snapping necks, slitting throats, singing seeds that seemed to make people simply curl up and die. Abigail seemed to be getting antsy, constantly grinding her teeth and snapping and unsnapping her scourge in place. Telly could sense that she was itching to fight, but Nicta wanted to keep things clean and quiet until they reached the lab, not wanting to lose the element of surprise. So Abigail had to stew quietly, making sure no one caught them off guard. Telly was so on edge, head constantly on a swivel, to make sure she didn't miss out on any more guards, but she completely missed when Nicta had stopped walking, and she marched right by her. Nicta reached out and snagged her by the back of the hood, pulling her back into formation. "We're here." "How can you tell?" Royale asked. She had been virtually silent the whole night. "She's right," Telly said, staring at the double doors that Nicta had indicated to. "I can feel the witch plague in that room." "How much, Red?" Nicta's intense gaze was on Telly. "A lot," Telly breathed out, her skin crawling. She could feel the writhing messes behind the closed doors, straining and fighting against its glass cages as it sensed the group of witches just on the other side. "I think it knows we're here too." She tried to keep the fear out of her voice. "Stand guard," Nicta ordered, her voice low. "I'm going to get this door open, but there's probably an alarm that will trigger the moment I do, so get ready." The three girls nodded, all getting into defensive positions as Nicta traced a sigil over one of the door handles. She cautiously grabbed the handle and turned, the door creaking open as Nicta grimaced, waiting for the shrill shriek of an alarm. Only silence followed. Telly breathed a sigh of relief, but Nicta's expression was still grim. "There could still be a silent alarm. Don't let your guard down." She stalked back over to the girls. "Caller?" She nodded at Raelle. "You're up. We've got your backs." Raelle nodded, and she made to go past Nicta, but was halted when Nicta grabbed her by the arm. "Give me your scourge." Raelle let out a laugh of disbelief. "And why would I do that?" "I'll give it back," Nicta said, with a roll of her eyes. "But I need more than just my voice and a knife, if I'm gonna be able to protect you and your sisters." Raelle hesitated for a moment, but then she reluctantly reached down and unsnapped her scourge from where it hung on her hip. "Just be careful with it." She looked pained as she handed it to Nicta. Nicta gave her an exaggerated wink, and Raelle looked like she instantly regretted her decision, but she walked over to the door Nicta had opened and disappeared into the room. "There's a lot in here," Raelle's voice came through far speech. "It might take me a while." Nicta positioned herself in front of Abigail and Raelle, motioning for them to stand behind her on her flanks. "Be thorough." She tilted her head as she spoke. "I don't want to leave any of that shit behind when we leave." Telly suddenly stiffened, her head jerking to the side. "Red?" Nicta's voice was tense. "What is it?" "Guards." To Abigail and Nicta it looked like Telly was staring wide-eyed at the wall, but they both knew that she could see and feel things they couldn't. "At least a dozen of them, maybe more." "How close?" Nicta readied the scourge she had borrowed from Raelle, Abigail mirroring her actions. "Coming down the stairwell from above, far side of the hallway." Telly tilted her head curiously, trying to get a better read on what she was seeing. "They've got voice boxes on." Nicta's lip curled in disgust. "Of course they do." She glanced around at the two cadets who stood behind her. "Are you guys ready?" Abigail smiled a toothy smile, and she whipped her scourge with a crack. "Oh, I was born ready." Nicta and Abigail seemed to be enjoying themselves, Telly noted. Rael's scourge was almost like an extension of Nicta's arm, whipping and slicing through the air, and some Camarilla, and she did the whole thing, with some sort of twisted grin on her face. Abigail was just being Abigail, apparently enjoying and acting some more revenge on the Camarilla. She had originally started out behind Nicta, as the second line of defense, but when she used her scourge to catch the hand of a Camarilla who had been aiming a knife at Nicta's back, she had moved forward, standing with her back to Nicta's. The two women fought almost naturally together, and Telly stood further back, closer to the doors, to make sure that no one slipped through and harmed Rael. She could dimly hear the seed that Rael was singing, the haunting tune of 1,000 voices layered on top of one another, and part of her was burning with curiosity to peer in and take a look at what was happening, but she didn't dare to turn her back on the fight that was happening in front of her, occasionally having to lash out or wind-strike someone away. There were more than a dozen guards. Telly started to wonder just what the hell Nicta's agents had been doing this whole time, because it seemed like there was an endless stream of Camarilla to fight. She lost all track of time, but it wasn't lost on her that Nicta and Abigail were slowly backing up towards her, losing ground. "Rael, you might want to hurry up in there," she shouted over her shoulder, struggling to be heard over the noise of the fighting. "I'm working on it," Rael snapped back. A cry of pain sent a jolt of fear through Telly, and she looked back at the fight to see Nicta punch a man so hard that his nose exploded with a spurt of blood, a knife sticking out of her hip. She wrenched the knife out with another roar of pain and used it to stab the man she had just punched. Abigail whirled around, and Telly rushed forward as Nicta grunted again, her leg giving out as she tried to take a step forward. "There are more coming soon," Telly whispered fearfully, but Abigail was just staring at Nicta in shock, as Nicta braced herself against the wall, sweat dripping down on her face. "You took that knife from me," Abigail said in awe. "Why?" "I told you, little bells," Nicta said in between winces of pain. "Your mom will kill me if anything happens to you." Her dark eyes flicked up to Telly. "To any of you." Abigail looked like she didn't quite believe her, but she didn't have time to push further. "Rael can heal you when this is all over, okay?" Nicta grimaced and pushed herself off the wall. "Let's just make sure she kills all the witch plague first. That's the priority." "Guys," Telly's throat constricted with fear. "Guys, there's more coming. At least 20 of them." 20? Where the fuck are they all coming from? Nicta hissed. But whether it was from pain or anger, Telly didn't know. "And where the fuck are my agents?" "Glad I'm not the only one thinking that," Abigail grumbled. Nicta shot her a glare. The Camarilla came too soon. Abigail easily took down 2 of them, and Telly finally stepped forward to help support Nicta, scourge lashing out at the nearest one. Something whistled through the air, shattering on impact against the wall beside Telly. A loud, dizzying screech sounded, and Telly was forced to cover her ears against the sound. She saw Abigail do the same out of the corner of her eye. Nicta looked around wildly, eyes widening as she took in the sight before her. The sound died down, and Telly looked up to see the Camarilla no longer fighting them, but instead fighting themselves. They tore each other apart in a matter of seconds, leaving only a sea of bodies and glistening blood. Telly felt bile rise in her throat, and she was forced to look away. Her eyes landed on the scattered remains of a glass bottle that lay at her feet, the object that had been thrown. She looked back at Nicta to find her staring at the bottle, almost in disbelief. There was a touch of anger to her face. "You all right, Nicta?" a strange voice came into the mix. Tally looked up to see 2 of Nicta's agents approaching them, bruised and bloodied. "We think we got everyone from the basement to this floor. A lot of them came running up when—" "What the fuck did I tell you?" Nicta interrupted her agent with a roar, stepping forward. She favored her right leg heavily, blood pouring from the wound on her hip, but she stalked forward and grabbed the agent who had spoken by the collar of her shirt, throwing her back against the wall. Tally and Abigail both jumped as the spree agent staggered back, hitting the wall with a crack. She suddenly looked terrified. Tally couldn't blame her. "I told you not to bring that shit with you." Nicta pointed to the broken bottle on the floor. "It was too risky." "Nicta, they're fine." The other spree agent, this one shorter and stockier, spoke up. "It didn't affect them at all." Nicta rounded on her. "Did you know that it wouldn't?" she asked with a dead stare. When she wasn't given a response, she took a menacing step forward. "Did you know that it wouldn't?" she shouted this time. "No." Nicta's lip curled. "And where the fuck is Amelia? Wasn't she with you?" "They killed her." The agent Nicta had thrown back against the wall stepped forward. "She died helping you and your stupid vendetta to help the army." She gestured wildly at Abigail and Tally. "We're supposed to be fighting against them, not with them. And here we are saving their ass. Your ass. And meanwhile you're borrowing their fucking weapons and being all worried about if your precious cadets were affected by the push or not." There was a wildfire behind Nicta's eyes as she glanced down at Rael's scourge in her hand, and then back up at her agents. "The army is not the enemy right now." She gestured to the pile of bodies around them, speaking slowly. "The Camarilla are. The ones stealing our fucking voices and making a plague to kill every last one of us." She glared at her 2 agents with an absolutely murderous look. "If you want to get into this later, then by all fucking means. But we have a job to finish. Go upstairs and find the others. Wait on the roof for the signal." She started to turn away, but stopped when neither of her agents moved. "Now!" The 2 agents looked incredibly unhappy, but they obeyed her orders, stepping over the bodies littering the floor as they stalked down the hallway to the stairwell. As soon as they were out of sight, Nicta staggered, stumbling into the wall behind her. "Whoa!" Tally rushed over to her, helping her down to the floor. "You're losing a lot of blood. Abigail, go get Rael. She really needs to—" "No." Nicta's voice sounded as if she had no energy left. "No. Destroying the witch plague is the priority." "Are you sure?" Abigail came over and squatted down next to Nicta. "It will only take—" Nicta held up her hand, silencing her with a head shake. "I want to make sure she has the energy to kill it all." "Did you bring any fixes with you tonight?" Tally asked. Nicta may have been putting on a brave face, but judging by the pale look on her face and the frankly terrifying amount of blood on her leg, she wasn't holding up as well as she wanted Tally and Abigail to think. Nicta let out a short burst of hysterical laughter. "The agent I threw against the wall? That was my fixer." She shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut for a moment. "Goddess, sometimes I don't know what the fuck I'm doing anymore." To both Tally and Nicta's surprise, Abigail reached out and put a comforting hand on Nicta's shoulder. "Nicta, I know you don't really agree with the army. That's understating it a little, but go on. But the fact that you're able to put all that hatred aside and work with them, with your mother, not the army." "Will you let me finish?" Abigail snapped. "I'm trying to comfort you here." Nicta smirked, but it didn't pack her usual punch. "Sorry. As I was saying, it's kind of admirable that you were able to put your hatred aside for the army and work with my mother," Abigail said slowly. To take down the Camarilla. It may seem weird to you to be working with, she frowned, my mother. Tally had to hold back a laugh at the very obvious way Abigail was making sure not to say the army. But the Camarilla is a threat to all of witchkind, and without this, without you, we never would have been able to find this place. So you may not know what you're doing anymore, but I think you're doing the right thing. Nicta let out a puff of air. Thanks, little bells. It was actually weirdly comforting. Really? Abigail crinkled her nose, 'cause I honestly had no idea what I was saying. Nicta barked out a laugh, then immediately winced, clutching at her hip. Oh, fuck. Don't make me laugh. The door to the lab burst open again, and Rael came running out, looking ashen and breathing hard. Despite the pain she was in, Nicta scrambled to her feet, grabbing at Tally and Abigail to help her up. Well, she demanded, did you get it? All of it? Rael held up a finger, doubling over as she struggled to catch her breath. After a few moments, she straightened, breathing slightly more normally. All of it. Her voice was hoarse and ridden with exhaustion, but there was no denying the excitement that it also held. Rael, Nicta's hurt. She needs help. Telly had no more than spoken the words when Rael suddenly started coughing violently, taking a step back. She gagged on something and twirled halfway around, bending over to cough up a spatter of blood. Telly felt Nicta sigh and lean on her more heavily. Shit. I can still try, Rael rasped out as she stood back up, wiping blood from her mouth. Let me try. No, you're not blowing your voice out or over-exerting yourself 'cause of me. Nicta shook her head. But I can help. Rael took a step forward. No, Nicta said firmly. We're getting out of here now. They can heal me at Fort Salem. Wait, you're coming with us? Abigail's eyes widened. Your mom wants a full in-person report. Nicta stepped away from the two girls who were holding her upright. My agents are going to stay behind, and once they see us leave, they're going to burn this place to the ground. Let's not wait around for them to get impatient and burn us down with it.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.